name is Mark Hertsgaard. I'm the political correspondent here at Link TV, and it is my great pleasure to welcome the 2004 Nobel Peace Prize winner, Wangari Maathai.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to Link TV.
Thank you.
Quick little bio for those of our viewers who don't know about you. Wangari Maathai is a Kenyan by nationality, a biologist by training, an activist by occupation, and now a member of the government in Kenya. She is the Assistant Minister for the Environment and Natural Resources. She is also the very first explicit environmentalist to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. That was a decision that surprised some people, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the interview. But first, I want to give people a little chance to get to know how you got to this point in life. When you won the Nobel Peace Prize, they cited your work, of course, with the Green Belt movement. And I know as a reporter, when I was in Kenya, was very impressed by the work of the Green Belt movement, which, to oversimplify terribly, the Green Belt movement is essentially a campaign that paid poor Kenyan women to plant trees. Tell us, why was that your environmental priority, to work with poor women in the countryside of Kenya to plant trees?
Well, I know we don't have much time to tell the story, how it started. But essentially, I'm a woman working in the University of Nairobi in a rather privileged position. And then in 1974, 75, the world women are talking about the first United Nations conference on women to take place in Mexico. And women in Kenya, like all other women in the world, are discussing and trying to identify the issues to take to Mexico. And as we discuss around the table as women, I notice that the rural women are looking at issues that have a lot to do with the land. The issue of firewood, the issue of water, the issue of food. And I recognize that the reason why these women do not have this is because their land is degraded. And I get an idea, we can plant trees. And I tell the women, let us plant trees. That way we protect the soil from soil erosion. When we keep the soil erosion away, we keep the waters clean. And if we protect our land, we can grow food. And so I immediately, maybe also because I had grown up in the rural areas myself and related very closely to what the women were talking about, I immediately put myself in that position and decided that that is something that they could address. And that's how I actually started. I wasn't starting to produce a movement. It was not on my mind. It was something literally to address the immediate issues that had to do with the preparation for the Mexico Conference on Women.
And you started, I think, the very first day. You tell the story that you planted 7 trees on the very first day. And of course, in all of our news reports, we always say 30 million trees you eventually planted.
Yeah, those 7 trees were actually a wonderful beginning in Nairobi. And I planted them, mostly it was they were memorial trees because they were planted on World Environment Day on the 5th of June, 1977. But it was actually the beginning of what was becoming, at that time, not a movement, just a project of the National Council of Women, trying to encourage the women who were members of the council to participate in the tree planting. What was eventually important was to address not only the issue of firewood and water and income that the women had raised originally, but for me, it became a learning experience. I gradually realized that there was more to it than the initial problems that the women had identified. And eventually it became the need to address other issues, the need to address forests protection, protection of biodiversity, the need to protect riverbeds, the need to protect green spaces, whether it was in the cities or in the urban centers, the need to provide people with the democratic space, the need to protect human rights, the need to protect women's rights, and the need to stop fighting over resources and instead manage them more responsibly and share them more equitably. The more I got into this activity, the more I realized that the issues and the problems that people were bringing to the table were symptoms of problems that needed to be addressed from the root. And so I kept going more and more towards the root to really address the root causes of the problems rather than deal with the symptoms. And I think that is what eventually made me go so deep till I began now addressing politics, addressing democracy issues, addressing conflict issues, addressing rights of the vulnerable, of women, of children, because so many of the issues that we were dealing with really are symptoms. And it also became necessary for me to work with the people and help them understand that some of the problems that they experience and deal with are not caused by third parties, that it is not the government or the police or your neighbors who is the problem, that part of the problem is yourself, and identify what you are doing wrong, and then look for a solution by engaging yourself.
It's a very environmental way of looking at the world. The farther you go into the process, the more you see the connections, because of course environmentalism says that everything is connected. Let's talk a little bit about poverty. In Africa, obviously, poverty is widespread, and the connection between poverty and the environment. I remember as a reporter in Kenya talking to a Kenyan woman who was just making that evening's meal and had cut down some trees. And I was asking her about that, and she said, listen, I want a safe, healthy environment for tomorrow, but I have to put food on the table today. That tension between poverty alleviation and long-term environmental restoration. Can you speak a little bit about that and how the Greenbelt movement, by planting trees, it seems you address both sides of that?
Yes, first of all, what I realized as I got into this, or along this path, is, as you say, the linkages of issues and the fact that, as I said earlier, that quite often we are dealing with the symptoms, but we don't go to the root cause of the problems. Poverty is both a symptom and a root cause. And in a situation such as in other developed countries or developing countries such as Kenya, 85% of the people live on the land. They're scraping the land. They're trying to get a livelihood out of the land. In doing so, they expose the soil, they remove vegetation, they have then soil erosion, and when they have soil erosion, they have poor soils, they are poor, therefore they cannot buy fertilizers, therefore their crop yield is going to be poor, and at the end of the day, they may not have enough harvest to cover the whole year before the next harvest, so they will go hungry. Now, when you look at those issues, you find yourself trapped in a vicious circle. And therefore, you need to break that cycle. And in the Greenbelt movement, we are trying to say that we are in a vicious cycle. We have to break it. But we want to break it at a point where we can do it within our own capacity, within our own resources, within our own technology. And fortunately, planting a tree doesn't require too much. And so it was easy to mobilize literally thousands of women planting trees. For every tree that survived, we would give them small compensation that amounted to about 4 US cents.
4 cents a tree?
Yeah, if the tree survived. If it died, too bad. But 4 cents. And that was partly to encourage them to plant many trees, because you need many. Until we can provide electricity to a large number of the rural populations, they will continue to use wood fuel as a source of energy. As long as you have poor people, they will continue to use wood, and in the rural urban centers, as you know, they will continue to use charcoal. So, and yet, at the same time, if the government wants to produce electricity in order to provide electricity to the rural populations, it needs water. At least in our case, much of our electricity is hydropower.
Yeah.
And if you're going to deforest, especially up on the mountains, you're not going to get water, you're not therefore going to be able to generate power, and of course then you are not able to help your rural populations. So that's why we say that it's very important for us to break the cycle of poverty. And until we break that cycle of poverty, we are not going to succeed. And that is why we, at the moment, as you know, there is a new effort, especially from people like Bono, who are really advocating very strongly, and we thank him, that we must address the issue of poverty in Africa. We cannot protect the environment or even expect to have peace in a situation such as that.
Let's talk about peace a little bit. As I said earlier, a lot of people were very surprised that an environmentalist was given the Nobel Peace Prize. Some Norwegians criticized the decision, as you well know. Can you explain in very brief, simple terms why it is that peace and the environment are in fact linked?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm very, very grateful to the Norwegian Nobel Committee for making this decision. It was a very brave decision, a very visionary decision, in my opinion, because those of us who work for the environment always knew that this linkage does exist. That in fact, if you look at many of the conflicts that we have in the world, whether national or global, they have something to do with resources. And in Africa alone, many of the conflicts that we have are over who will control these resources. How will these resources be distributed? Who will get them and who will be marginalized? And in the process, some people just decide they're going to fight. So the committee, what the committee was saying is that, yes, of course, it can continue to give prizes to people who come to bring warring groups and separate them, or who fight for human rights issues. But isn't it possible also to preempt these conflicts? That we, as a human family, decide that perhaps if we managed our resources better, if we shared them more equitably, if we created more democratic space for more people, that we could preempt the conflicts rather than wait until we have fought and then give those who try to bring us together the Nobel Peace Prize. So I really believe that this was a very wonderful suggestion to us as a human family, that we think again, why do these conflicts come and what can we do to prevent conflict? And indeed, the way the Greenbelt movement has been working was to look at these issues not in isolation, but in a holistic way.
So you preempt the conflict rather than launch preemptive attacks. The reason perhaps that Wangari Maathai was awarded the 2004 Nobel Peace Prize. We've been very pleased to have you here with us on Link TV.
Thank you very much for having me.
Much. I'm Mark Hertsgaard in San Francisco. Thanks for joining us.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only US network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.